Let me talk about Paul Ray. Paul Ray is a bright young man. He's the kind of person I think most of us would say, well, he ought to be in an administration. I don't care if it was a Democratic administration or a Republican administration. Smart, well-educated, good experience. He's been nominated to head up something called OIRA, the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs, an entity that exists within OMB. I've met him. He's come to my office to talk with me. Very polite young man. He's been before our committee, and I voted today against his confirmation. And I'll tell you why. The Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs used to be the Committee on Governmental Affairs. I've served on it for 19 years. And one of the things I love about that committee is we have oversight over the whole federal government. Every committee that we serve on, including committees our presiding officer serves on, we all have an oversight role. And a lot of that oversight deals with oversight over the administrations as part of our checks and balances. We can only do that job so well if the administration allows us to do our job. And during the confirmation process, we, as the presiding officer knows, witnesses, nominees come before us from the administration. They've been vetted by the administration. They've gone through staff interviews, and then they come to a committee hearing. And we ask questions of the nominees that are relevant to the job that they're going to do. Every now and then you have a nominee for a particular position who is not forthcoming in their responses. And so we do something called QFRs, questions for the record, that are designed to give the nominee another bite out of the apple to respond to the questions Democrats and Republicans have. A lot of times the nominees are more forthcoming, and that's good. And the nomination moves forward and they get confirmed. I've learned if nominees are not forthcoming, are not responsive to the oversight questions that we ask before they get confirmed, good luck after they get confirmed. It doesn't get any better. And I don't care whether you happen to be a Democrat or Republican, you've got to be concerned about the reluctance or the unwillingness of nominees to respond to reasonable questions, regardless of who's in the White House, regardless of who's the majority in this body. Let me say a word or two about OIRA. OIRA plays a central role in establishing regulatory and information collection policies across our entire federal government. OIRA oversees the rulemaking process from start to finish, from reviewing drafts of proposed and final rules to managing the interagency review process to ensuring agencies make rule-making decisions based on sound cost-benefit analysis. The administrator of OIRA is a critically important position because at the end of the day, he or she is responsible for ensuring that rules promulgated by agencies benefit our society, protect our quality of life, protect our health, protect our safety, protect our environment. Earlier today, I joined a number of my colleagues on the Environment and Public Works Committee on a letter to Mr. Ray, asking him to review concerns raised recently by EPA's Science Advisory Board about 4 specific rulemakings currently under review. 4. The EPA Science Advisory Board found serious concerns with the Trump administration's clean car standards, that rule, with the administration's proposed mercury and air toxics rule, as well as the administration's clean water rule rollbacks, and a proposed EPA secret science rule, which will have the effect of limiting the science that EPA can actually use in rulemakings. The advisory board found serious shortcomings with how EPA conducted these rulemakings. Either the cost-benefit analysis was insufficient, was deficient, the agency did not use best available science, or the legal rationale underpinning the rule was faulty. In case you're wondering who selects the members of this EPA Science Advisory Board, well, as it turns out, the president. In this case, the 44 members of the EPA Science Advisory Board were nominated or renominated under this administration. All 44. This administration, this president. And they said the rulemaking these 4 rulemakings that I just mentioned, there's problems, serious problems with those rulemakings. And these are not Obama people. These were nominated by this president. Mr. Ray has served in top leadership positions at OIRA since June of 2018, first as associate administrator, and then in March of last year, he was promoted to acting administrator. Mr. Ray has presided over or been involved with dozens of controversial rulemaking decisions in the last year and a half at OIRA, including the rulemakings outlined in the letter that I've mentioned that we are sending him today. That is why during the vetting process of his nomination, I, along with my colleagues on the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, asked for information about Mr. Ray's background and his work in the last year and a half at this agency, at OIRA, within OMB. Specifically, we asked him about his involvement in many controversial regulatory rulemaking decisions put forward by the current administration. Unfortunately, sadly really, Mr. Ray and the Office of Management and Budget have refused to provide the Senate with the information needed to vet Mr. Ray's nomination. As best I can tell, they didn't even try. And unfortunately, throughout the vetting process, Mr. Ray apparently refused to answer senators' questions by asserting privilege or deferring to the OMB General Counsel more frequently than any past OIRA nominee who has ever appeared before our committee. Something is wrong with that. Something is wrong with that. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican in this body, and if the nominee comes from a Democratic president or Republican administration, something is wrong with that. In fact, Mr. Ray asserted privilege or deferred to counsel 19 times. 19 times. In his pre-hearing questionnaire responses alone. In his pre-hearing questionnaire responses alone. Is that a lot? Well, that may well be more time than any other nominee in the history of this agency. Think about that. And while it might be appropriate to withhold or redact particular content in some narrow circumstances, Mr. Ray and the OMB Office of General Counsel have misapplied overly broad privilege to avoid providing Congress with critical information and documents related to his work at OIRA. Ever hear of checks and balance? There's a reason why we have this oversight. There's a reason why we don't have kings or monarchs here who can do just anything that they want without a check or a balance. And this nomination process, at least for this nominee, sadly, because I think he's well qualified and he's bright, is just really takes a thumb and sticks it in the eye of checks and balances. Unfortunately, should this body vote to confirm Mr. Ray, his general approach of non-responsiveness to the committee's vetting process sets a concerning precedent. Not just for him, not just for nominees in this agency, but for future nominees and subsequent oversight efforts to hold the executive branch accountable. So, Mr. President, it has been my privilege to serve on the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, as I said earlier, for 19 years now. We're an oversight committee. We conduct oversight over the whole federal government, and not just the government, but on matters important to our nation outside of the government. And one of our core duties is to ensure that nominees are forthcoming and provide the Senate with the information we need to do our jobs. Eventually, we're going to have an election. Who knows who's going to win next time, and who will be in the majority here in this body. But we should expect that nominees who appear before the Senate under any administration, are forthcoming and provide us with the relevant information we need to adequately vet their nomination. For these reasons, Mr. President, I must reluctantly note my opposition to Mr. Ray's nomination for now and urge my colleagues to do the same. And with that, I yield the floor.